My name is Jake, and 3 weeks ago I thought the worst part of working nights at Save Mart was dealing with drunk college kids buying energy drinks at 3 a.m. I was wrong. Dead wrong. The first sign something wasn't right came when I found those wet footprints leading from the frozen food section to the employee break room. Perfectly shaped like bare feet, but no one had been in the store for hours. Every night shift worker in Ohio has heard the stories about the aisle walker. That thing that moves between the shelves when the lights are dim and the cameras can't quite capture what's really there. I used to laugh at those stories. Now I count down the minutes until sunrise, praying I'll make it through another night without hearing those soft, wet footsteps echoing through the empty aisles behind me. I ended up in Marietta after my construction job in Columbus went belly up. The housing market crashed, and suddenly there were more framers than houses to build. My cousin Danny worked at the Save Mart distribution center and told me they needed someone for overnight stock. Easy money, he said. Just you and the merchandise. What he didn't mention was why the last 3 night shifters had quit without giving notice. The Save Mart sits on the edge of town where State Route 7 curves toward the Ohio River. It's one of those big box stores that killed off the local Kroger and IGA, leaving folks no choice but to shop there. During the day, it bustles with families and seniors using their grocery scooters. At night, it transforms into something else entirely. The building went up in 1994 on land that used to be the Riverside Cemetery. The city relocated most of the graves when they sold the property to corporate, but anyone who's lived in Marietta long enough knows you can't move all the dead. Some prefer to stay put. My first week went smooth enough. I'd punch in at 11 p.m., spend 8 hours unloading trucks and stocking shelves, then drive home to my apartment above Jeremiah's hardware store as the morning commuters headed to work. The pay wasn't great, $14.50 an hour, but it covered rent and kept me in bologna sandwiches and Miller High Life. The store felt different at night, though. Sounds carried further in the empty space. The refrigeration units hummed louder. The automatic doors would sometimes open for no reason, letting in humid summer air that smelled like the river. But it wasn't until my second week that I noticed the footprints. They appeared most often near the frozen foods, always wet, always bare, always leading somewhere I hadn't been. I mentioned them to Carla, the day manager who trained me, but she just handed me a mop and said, "Night shift sees all kinds of things. Clean them up and don't think too hard about where they come from." That should have been my first warning. In a small town like Marietta, people don't brush off the strange. They talk about it over coffee at Rossi's Deli and debate it at city council meetings. When someone tells you not to think about something, that's when you should start paying attention. It was my third week when Tommy Kowalski finally told me about the protocols. Tommy had been working Save Mart for 6 years, splitting time between day receiving and occasional nights when corporate demanded extra coverage. He was one of those guys who knew everyone in Marietta. Went to high school with half the town, dated the other half. If anyone understood what happened during those dark hours, it would be him. I found him smoking behind the loading dock during my break, staring across the parking lot toward the river. The August heat still clung to the asphalt, even at 2 a.m., and crickets chirped from the patch of woods that separated our lot from the old boat launch. "You been seeing things yet?" he asked without looking at me. "Footprints," I admitted. "Wet ones. Always near the freezers." Tommy nodded like he'd been expecting this. "How long you been here now?" 3 weeks. "About that. Yeah, that's when it starts." He took a long drag from his Marlboro. "Carla didn't give you the list?" "What list?" He laughed, but there wasn't any humor in it. "Corporate doesn't write this stuff down, you understand? Liability issues. But every night shift worker learns the same rules, one way or another, usually after their first incident. The way he said incident made my stomach tighten. What kind of incident? Depends. Some folks see things, others hear them. Billy Patterson worked here before you. He felt something brush against his shoulder while he was stocking the soup aisle. Turned around, nobody there, but his shirt had 5 finger-shaped tears right through the fabric. I waited for him to continue, watching a semi-truck rumble past on Route 7, its headlights sweeping across the river. "Look," Tommy said, flicking a cigarette into the gravel. "I'm going to tell you what Earl Hoffman told me when I started nights. What Earl learned from the guy before him. These ain't official company policies, you understand? Just guidelines for staying safe." He counted them off on his fingers. First, never stock aisle 12 after 3 a.m. That's where the pet food and cleaning supplies are. Something about that section draws attention. Leave it for day shift. Second, if you hear your name being called, especially if it sounds like someone you know, don't answer right away. Count to 10 first. If they call again, then it's probably real. Third, the wet footprints you've been seeing, don't follow them, ever. They leave places you don't want to go. Fourth, keep the radio on the service channel. If it starts picking up voices that ain't from our store, voices speaking backwards or in languages you don't recognize, turn the volume all the way down, but don't switch it off. Fifth, if the automatic doors open and nobody's there, prop them open for exactly 3 minutes. Use the shopping carts if you have to. After 3 minutes, let them close. Sixth, the security cameras and frozen foods sometimes show things that ain't there when you look with your own eyes. If you're monitoring them and see something move that shouldn't, just switch to a different camera. Don't investigate. Seventh, always finish your shift. No matter what you see, hear, or feel, you stay until 7 a.m. Walking out early, well, the folks who've done that tend to have problems even after they leave the store. I stared at him. You're serious about all this? Dead serious. You think I'd waste my break time spinning ghost stories? Tommy pulled out another cigarette. This store's been here almost 30 years, built on old graves like you probably heard. But it ain't just that. Something about the combination, the fluorescent lights, the refrigeration, all that electricity running through a space where people used to rest in peace. It creates conditions. A sound echoed from inside the store, a faint scraping, like something being dragged across linoleum. We both heard it. That'll be your friend making the rounds, Tommy said. Let's get back inside. And Jake? Yeah. Don't think following those rules makes you safe. It just makes you safer. There's a difference. I walked back toward the employee entrance, Tommy's warning cycling through my head. 7 rules. 7 things I needed to remember to make it through each night in one piece. As I pushed through the door, I caught a glimpse of wet footprints leading from the customer service desk toward the back of the store. They hadn't been there when I'd come outside 20 minutes ago. I grabbed my clipboard and headed for aisle 7, tanned goods, far from frozen foods, far from aisle 12. At least now I knew there were boundaries, lines I shouldn't cross. Whether I'd be able to stick to them was another question entirely. The next night, I came prepared. I'd written Tommy's 7 rules on a piece of paper and tucked it in my shirt pocket. Not that I expected to forget them. They'd been rattling around my head all day while I tried to sleep in my stuffy apartment. Every time I dozed off, I'd jolt awake, thinking about wet footprints and voices calling my name. Carla was finishing up the evening paperwork when I arrived at 10:45 p.m. She looked tired, which was normal for someone who'd been dealing with customers and vendors for 10 hours straight. truck came in late today," she said, handing me the receiving sheets. "You've got about 2 pallets of grocery and 1 of frozen. Should keep you busy till dawn." "Any special instructions?" I asked, hoping she might mention Tommy's rules. She paused at the door, keys jingling in her hand. "Same as always, Jake. Stock the shelves. Keep the place clean. Don't let anyone steal the beer." She started to leave, then turned back. "Oh, and if you hear the PA system turn on by itself, just ignore it. Old building. Old wiring. Sometimes gets crossed signals from the CB radios truckers use on Route 7. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving me alone with 40,000 square feet of retail space and whatever else might be lurking in the aisles. I started with the frozen truck, wheeling cases of ice cream and TV dinners to their proper sections. The freezer aisles felt different at night, colder than they should be, even accounting for the refrigeration. My breath came out in small puffs as I worked, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder more often than necessary. Around 1 a.m., I was stocking the ice cream freezer when I heard it. "Jake." The voice came from somewhere behind me, soft and familiar. It sounded like Danny, my cousin who'd gotten me the job, but Danny worked days at the distribution center. He wouldn't be here at this hour. Rule number 2 echoed in my mind. Count to 10 if you hear your name called. 1, 2, 3. The voice of someone who sounded exactly like my cousin had just called my name in an empty store. 4, 5, 6. My hands kept moving, placing Rocky Road containers in their designated spots. 7, 8, 9, 10. Silence. No second call. Whatever had spoken my name wasn't real, or at least wasn't Danny. I kept working, but my shoulders stayed tense for the next hour. At 2:30 a.m., I was pushing a cart full of canned goods toward aisle 7 when the PA system crackled to life. "Attention Save Mart customers," a pleasant female voice announced. "We're currently having a special on-ground beef in our meat department. Buy 2 pounds, get 1 free." I stopped walking. The meat department had been closed since 9 p.m., and we weren't open to customers anyway. More concerning was the voice itself. It had the same professional tone as our regular announcements, but something about the cadence felt wrong. Like someone trying very hard to sound human. The announcement repeated, word for word, with the exact same inflection, then again and again. I remembered what Carla had said about crossed CB signals, but this didn't sound like trucker chatter. This sounded like our store's own automated system, stuck in a loop. After the 5th repetition, I walked to the customer service desk and found the PA controls. A simple switch marked on-off sat next to a microphone. The switch was already in the off position. The announcement kept playing. I decided to leave it alone and focus on my work. The voice eventually stopped after playing 17 more times. I counted each one while stocking soup cans. "Hi, everyone. Before we move forward, I have something exciting to tell you. Many of you asked for stories without the strange rules, so I created a brand new channel just for that. It's called Mr. Grimm Archive. The link is in the description, or you can click the card above. I think you'll really enjoy it. So check it out whenever you want some more exciting types of stories. Also, I hope you're enjoying the 2 uploads a day. Let me know in the comments if you like some stories from your location. Now, let's continue with today's story. By 3:15 a.m., I'd finished most of the grocery items and was debating whether to tackle the remaining frozen goods or take my scheduled break. That's when I noticed the wet footprints. They started near the dairy cooler and led toward the back of the store, each print perfectly shaped like a human foot. The water was still fresh. I could see small puddles forming around the heel marks. Rule number 3, don't follow them. But curiosity has always been my weakness. In high school, I was the kid who had to know what was behind every "do not enter" sign. During my construction days, I'd explore condemned buildings just to see what was left inside. The footprints led down the main aisle, past pharmacy and seasonal goods, then turned left toward the employee areas. They stopped at the door to the break room. I stood there for maybe 2 minutes, staring at that door. The footprints ended right at the threshold, as if whatever made them had simply vanished upon reaching the room where employees ate lunch and complained about their shifts. The smart thing would have been to walk away, get back to stocking shelves and pretend I hadn't seen anything. Instead, I pushed the door open. The break room looked exactly as it should. Round table with plastic chairs, refrigerator covered in safety notices, coffee maker that hadn't been cleaned in weeks. Nothing unusual, nothing out of place, except for the puddle of water in the center of the floor. It wasn't a small puddle either. This was the kind of standing water you'd expect from someone who'd just stepped out of a swimming pool. But the water was perfectly clear, not chlorinated pool water or muddy river water, just water. I grabbed some paper towels from the dispenser and mopped it up, my hands shaking slightly as I worked. The towels came away damp but clean, with no odor or residue. When I finished, I checked my watch. 3:47 a.m. Almost time for the real test. Rule number 1 said never to stock aisle 12 after 3 a.m. I had 13 minutes to finish the pet food and cleaning supplies if I wanted to follow Tommy's guidelines. I jogged back to my cart and grabbed the remaining boxes: dog food, cat litter, bleach, dish soap. Aisle 12 stretched before me, fluorescent lights flickering slightly overhead. During the day, this was just another aisle full of household necessities. At night, it felt different, heavier somehow. I worked as fast as I could, tossing items onto shelves without worrying about perfect alignment. My watch read 3:58 a.m. when I placed the last bottle of fabric softener. 2 minutes to spare. I was wheeling my empty cart back toward receiving when I heard footsteps behind me. Not wet footsteps. These were the sharp clicks of dress shoes against linoleum. I turned around. Aisle 12 was empty, but I could still hear the walking. Steady, rhythmic steps that seemed to be pacing back and forth between the detergent and the dog treats. At exactly 4 a.m., the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than any sound. I should have called him sick the next night. My hands were still shaking from the footsteps in aisle 12, and I barely managed 2 hours of sleep before my upstairs neighbor started hammering something in his apartment. By the time evening rolled around, every shadow looked suspicious, and every creak of the old building above Jeremiah's hardware made me jump. But I needed the money, and quitting after 3 weeks wouldn't look good on future job applications. So I showed up at Save Mart with a thermos full of black coffee and what I hoped was enough courage to get through 8 more hours. The truck that night was smaller, just one pallet of miscellaneous items that corporate had marked for clearance. Mostly seasonal stuff. Back-to-school supplies, lawn chairs, a few cases of energy drinks that were approaching their expiration dates. I decided to tackle the radio situation first. Tommy's 4th rule had been clear: keep it on the service channel, but turn the volume down if strange voices appeared. The problem was, I'd never actually used the store's radio system. I found the base unit behind the customer service counter, a chunky Motorola that looked like it belonged in a police cruiser from the 1990s. The display showed Channel 7, which I assumed was our service frequency. The volume was set halfway up, and static hissed softly from the speaker. For the first hour, everything seemed normal. Occasionally, I'd hear voices from other businesses: the night clerk at the Shell station on Washington Street, a security guard at the community college campus, normal night shift workers doing normal jobs. Then, around 1:30 a.m., the voices changed. It started subtle, a man's voice saying what sounded like, El Crixie 8 emit. The words were backwards, like someone had recorded normal speech and played it in reverse. I grabbed a pen and wrote down what I heard, then tried to work out what he'd actually said. El Crixie 8 emit. Time is circle. I reached for the volume knob and turned it down to barely audible, just like Tommy had instructed. But the backwards voice kept going. Snur si sekam glit et. I scribbled frantically, translating in my head. The thing makes his rounds. Then a woman's voice joined in, also speaking backwards. Mor kerb et nignitia. Waiting in the break room. My pen slipped from my fingers. Something was waiting in the break room. The same break room where I'd found that puddle of water the night before. I grabbed my flashlight and clipboard, trying to look like I was conducting a routine security check, and headed toward the employee area. The radio's muffled voices followed me, a constant stream of reversed speech that I no longer wanted to translate. The break room door was closed, which was normal. I pressed my ear against it and listened. Dripping. Water was dripping inside the room, steady and rhythmic like a leaky faucet. But I knew there wasn't a sink in there, just the coffee station with its ancient Mr. Coffee machine. I pushed the door open slowly. The room was empty, but water covered the floor. Not a puddle this time. The entire linoleum surface was wet, as if someone had hosed down the interior. Water dripped from the ceiling tiles, forming dozens of small pools that reflected the fluorescent lighting above. But here's the thing that made my stomach lurch. The water was dripping upward. I watched drops of water fall from the floor, rise through the air, and disappear into the ceiling tiles. Physics had taken a holiday, and gravity was running backwards in my break room. I backed out and slammed the door shut. My hands were trembling as I returned to the customer service desk. The radio was still murmuring backwards voices, but I couldn't bring myself to listen anymore. Whatever was happening in that room, whatever the voices were trying to tell me, I didn't want to know. At 2:45 a.m., the automatic doors opened. No one was there. No customers, no delivery trucks, no stray cats from the parking lot. The doors just slid apart and stayed open, letting humid night air flow into the store. Rule number 5. Prop them open for exactly 3 minutes. I grabbed 2 shopping carts and wedged them in the doorway, then checked my watch. 2:46 a.m. 3 minutes. I could do 3 minutes. The air that flowed in carried the smell of the Ohio River, muddy water and decaying fish, mixed with something else I couldn't identify. Something organic and old, like flowers left too long in a vase. A minute passed, then 2. At the 3-minute mark, I moved the carts and let the doors close. They slid shut with their usual pneumatic hiss, sealing out the night air and whatever had wanted to come inside. I was walking back to my cart when I heard my name again. Jake. This time it wasn't Danny's voice. It was my father's voice, calling me the way he used to when I was late for dinner. Dad had been dead for 5 years, killed in a car accident outside Toledo, but his voice was as clear as if he were standing right behind me. I started counting. 1, 2, 3. Jake, come here. 4, 5, 6. My father's voice, patient but insistent, the way it sounded when he was teaching me to change oil in our garage. 7, 8, 9, 10. No third call came, but I felt something brush against the back of my neck. Fingers trailing across my skin with the temperature of river water. I spun around, but found only empty aisles and the endless hum of refrigeration units. That's when I noticed the cameras. The security monitors at customer service showed feeds from around the store. Entrances, high theft areas, the pharmacy. but the screen labeled "Frozen Foods" displayed something that made my breath catch. A figure stood in aisle 4, right next to the ice cream freezers. Tall, wearing what looked like a dark suit, perfectly still. But when I looked down the actual aisle from where I stood, it was empty. Rule number 6, switch cameras. Don't investigate. I clicked to a different view, the parking lot camera. Normal. Empty pavement under sodium lights. I waited 30 seconds, then switched back to frozen foods. The figure was gone, but now there were wet footprints on the monitor, leading from where it had been standing toward the back of the store. I could see them clearly on screen. Each toe mark defined, water glistening under the fluorescent lights. I looked down the actual aisle again. Dry floor, no footprints, no water. Whatever I was dealing with existed in 2 places at once: the physical store I worked in, and some shadow version that only the cameras could see. The thought made my head spin. The radio crackled behind me, and for just a moment, I heard a voice speaking forward instead of backward. Clear as day, in English I could understand. He's learning the patterns. Then static and silence. I spent the rest of my shift stocking shelves as far from the cameras as possible, avoiding aisle 12 entirely, and trying not to think about upward dripping water or figures that existed only on security monitors. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me learn the rules, cataloging my behavior, figuring out how I fit into whatever system governed the night shift at Save Mart. And that maybe learning the patterns was exactly what it wanted me to do. The 4th night changed everything. I almost didn't show up. After 3 nights of backwards voices, gravity-defying water, and phantom figures on security cameras, my nerves were shot. I'd called Tommy that afternoon, hoping he'd have some wisdom about dealing with the escalating weirdness. But his phone went straight to voicemail. So I sat in my Chevy outside Save Mart at 10:30 p.m., engine running, debating whether $14.50 an hour was worth my sanity. That's when I saw Billy Patterson. He was standing in the parking lot near the shopping cart return, just outside the cone of light from the nearest lamppost. Same blue Save Mart vest I wore, same tacky pants. But Billy had quit 3 weeks ago, right before I started. According to Tommy, he'd left after something tore his shirt while he was stocking soup. I rolled down my window. "Billy? That you, man?" He turned toward my voice, and in the dim light, his face looked wrong. Not disfigured or monstrous, just wrong, like a photograph that had been developed incorrectly. His features were there, but they didn't quite line up the way they should. "Jake," he said, and his voice carried across the parking lot with crystal clarity. "Don't go in tonight." "What do you mean?" "It's testing you. Each night, the tests get harder. I made it 4 weeks before." He gestured to his torso, and I could see tears in his vest. Not just the 5 finger-shaped holes Tommy had mentioned, but dozens of small rips, as if something with claws had been systematically shredding the fabric. Before what? Billy started walking toward the woods that separated the parking lot from the old boat launch. "Some rules can't be followed forever, Jake. Eventually, you have to choose between the job and staying human." He disappeared between the trees, leaving me alone with the sound of my idling engine and the distant whistle of a freight train heading south toward Parkersburg. I should have driven away, should have gone home, packed my few belongings, and caught the next Greyhound bus to anywhere else. Instead, I turned off the engine and walked toward the employee entrance. Carla was waiting inside, which was unusual. She typically left before my shift started, but tonight she stood behind the customer service counter with a clipboard and the expression I couldn't read. "Jake," she said, "we need to talk." "About what?" Corporate's been reviewing the security footage from your shifts. They've noticed some irregularities. My stomach dropped. Had the cameras captured something that would reveal what was really happening here? What kind of irregularities? You talking to empty aisles? Standing in the break room doorway for extended periods? Last night you spent 47 minutes stocking a single shelf of canned goods. She flipped through pages on her clipboard. They're concerned about productivity. I can explain. No need. Corporate understands that night shift can be challenging. They've decided to send someone to work with you. Make sure you're adapting properly to the environment. That's when I noticed the man sitting in the plastic chairs near the pharmacy. Tall, wearing a dark suit that looked expensive, even under the fluorescent lighting. He had the kind of face you'd forget 5 minutes after meeting him. Average in every way, except for his eyes, which were too attentive, too aware. "This is Mr. Henley," Carla said. "He'll be observing your work tonight." Henley stood and extended his hand. His grip was firm and uncomfortably cold. "Pleasure to meet you, Jake. I've heard interesting things about your performance." After Carla left, Henley followed me to the receiving area. He didn't help with the truck, just watched as I unloaded boxes and sorted them by department. His presence made every task feel like a test, and I found myself moving more carefully, more deliberately. "Tell me about the rules," he said around midnight. I stopped pushing my cart. "What rules?" "The informal guidelines your co-workers have shared." I understand there are protocols for night shift that aren't in the official employee handbook. There was no point lying. He already knew. Tommy told me some things. Ways to stay safe. Safe from what exactly? I gestured around the store. "Whatever's in here with us." Henley smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "And what do you think is in here with us, Jake?" Before I could answer, the PA system crackled to life. "Attention Save Mart customers. The store will be closing in 15 minutes. Please bring your purchases to the front checkout lanes." We both looked at each other. It was past midnight. We weren't open to customers, and the announcement made no sense. "Happens sometimes," I said. "Old building, crossed wires." "I see. And how do you typically respond to these crossed wires?" "I ignore them, like management instructed." The announcement played again. Exactly the same wording, same tone. Then again. I counted 12 repetitions before it stopped. "Interesting frequency," Henley observed. 12 repetitions. Is that significant? I thought about aisle 12, the pet food and cleaning supplies I wasn't supposed to stock after 3 a.m. "I don't know." "Let me ask you this, Jake. If you had to stock aisle 12 right now, would you?" It was 12:47 a.m., well before the 3 a.m. deadline. "Sure, if you needed me to." "I do need you to. There's a pallet of dog food that needs to go out tonight." He led me to a pallet I hadn't noticed before, wrapped in plastic and sitting near the employee break room. As I cut away the wrapping, I realized the boxes felt wrong. Too light for dog food, and they didn't make any sound when I shook them. But I loaded them onto my cart and followed Henley to aisle 12. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered more than usual as we walked down the pet food aisle. Henley stayed close behind me, close enough that I could hear his breathing, which was too steady, too controlled. "Place them anywhere," he said. "Doesn't matter where." I started shelving the boxes, and that's when I noticed they were warm. Not just room temperature, actually warm, like they contained something alive and generating heat. "Mr. Henley," I said, "these boxes feel..." "Continue working, Jake." The warmth was spreading through my hands now, up my arms. The boxes weren't just warm, they were getting hotter. I tried to put one down, but my hands wouldn't let go. My fingers had somehow fused to the cardboard, skin bonding with the surface like I'd grabbed a red-hot skillet. "What's happening?" I managed to say through gritted teeth. "You're learning what happens when you follow orders without question," Hemley replied. "When you stop thinking for yourself and just obey the rules." The heat was becoming unbearable. I could smell my skin starting to burn, could feel blisters forming under my palms. With enormous effort, I yanked my hands away from the box, leaving strips of skin stuck to the cardboard. My hands were raw and bleeding, but I was free. "Very good," Henley said, applauding slowly. "You chose pain over compliance. That's the first lesson." I looked at him, really looked, and noticed his suit wasn't wrinkled despite hours in the store. His hair hadn't moved out of place. He looked exactly the same as when I'd first met him. "What are you?" "I'm what happens when you follow the rules perfectly, Jake. When you never question, never deviate, never choose your own path." His smile widened, showing teeth that were too white, too straight. Billy Patterson figured that out in his 4th week. Smart boy. He chose to leave rather than become like me. The warmth from the boxes had spread to the entire aisle. The air shimmered like heat waves rising from summer asphalt. "Your shift ends in 6 hours," Hemley said. "Let's see what other rules you're willing to break." My hands were still bleeding when Henley led me toward the frozen food section. The pain helped me focus. Every throb reminded me that I was still human, still capable of feeling something other than the cold compliance he represented. I'd wrapped my palms in paper towels from the break room, but blood was already seeping through the makeshift bandages. "Rule number 6, Hemley said conversationally as we walked. "Don't investigate camera anomalies in frozen foods. Tell me, Jake, why do you think that rule exists?" "To keep people safe." "Safe from what?" I didn't answer. The truth was, I'd never really thought about what I was being protected from. Just accepted that following the rules meant survival. "Let me show you something." He led me to the customer service desk and pointed at the security monitors. The screen labeled "Frozen Foods" showed our normal view of aisle 4, freezer cases full of ice cream, frozen pizzas, and TV dinners. Nothing unusual. Then Henley reached over and switched the monitor to a different input setting I hadn't known existed. The same aisle appeared on screen, but everything was wrong. The freezer cases were empty, their glass doors hanging open like gaping mouths. The floor was covered in several inches of dark water that reflected nothing. And standing at the far end of the aisle was a group of people in Save Mart uniforms. I recognized Tommy immediately, even though he looked different on screen. His face was slack, expressionless, and his eyes had the same too white quality I'd noticed in Henley's smile. Next to him stood 3 other people I didn't recognize, former night shift workers, I assumed. They chose compliance, Hemley explained, perfect adherence to the rules. No questions, no deviations, no human weakness interfering with their duties. One of the figures on screen turned toward the camera, and I saw it was Billy Patterson. But unlike the version I'd encountered in the parking lot, this Billy looked complete, unmarked. His Save Mart vest was pristine. 2 versions of Billy, I said, understanding dawning. The one outside was the part that escaped. Very good. When someone breaks free from the system, they leave part of themselves behind. The part that learned to follow orders without thinking. Hemley gestured to the screen. That's what's waiting for you if you continue choosing pain over compliance. The figures on the monitor began walking toward the camera, their movements synchronized like a marching band. As they got closer, I could see that their feet weren't touching the water-covered floor. They were walking on the surface, each step creating small ripples that spread outward in perfect circles. Your choice, Jake. Join them willingly, or keep fighting until there's nothing left of you to fight with. I looked at my bandaged hands, then back at the monitor. The figures had reached the front of the aisle and were staring directly into the camera. Their mouths moved in unison, but I couldn't hear what they were saying. What happens if I just leave? Walk out right now? You can try. But the system has invested time in training you. It doesn't like to lose inventory. As if summoned by his words, the automatic doors at the front of the store began opening and closing rapidly, creating a strobe effect with the parking lot lights. The sound echoed through the empty store. Whoosh, click, whoosh, click, like mechanical breathing. Besides, Henley continued, where would you go? Back to construction work that doesn't exist, another retail job, or you'll face the same choice eventually. This is what night shift work has become, Jake. All across Ohio, all across the country. The rules are spreading. I thought about the other stores I'd seen, the Walmart in Lancaster, where my cousin said the Night Stalkers never seemed to age, the Target in Chillicothe, where employees spoke in whispers and avoided eye contact. How many places had systems like this? How many workers had faced the same choice between humanity and compliance? The radio behind us crackled to life, and this time the voices weren't speaking backwards. They were speaking in the same synchronized rhythm as the figures on the monitor. Jake Martinez, employee number 47,731, please report to aisle 12 for immediate processing. My real name. My employee number. They knew exactly who I was. Rule number 7, Henley said. Always finish your shift, no matter what you see, hear, or feel. The clock on the wall showed 3:17 a.m., 3 hours and 43 minutes until 7 a.m., 3 hours and 43 minutes until I could leave, if I was still human enough to want to. I'm not going to aisle 12, I said. Then you're choosing to break the final rule. The temperature in the store dropped suddenly, as if someone had opened every freezer case simultaneously. My breath came out in visible puffs, and frost began forming on the security monitors. That's what happens when employees don't follow protocol, Henley explained. The system has to maintain order. The PA system crackled again. Code blue in aisle 12. All available personnel respond immediately. But there was no other personnel. Just me, Henley, and whatever was waiting in aisle 12. The fluorescent lights began flickering in sequence, starting at the front of the store and moving toward the back like a wave. Each section went dark for exactly 3 seconds before coming back on. When the wave reached frozen foods, the lights stayed off. You're running out of time, Jake. The processing begins at 4 a.m., whether you're there or not. I looked at the clock. 3:29 a.m. Something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the pain from my burned hands, or the memory of Billy's warning, or just the accumulated exhaustion of 4 nights spent navigating someone else's rules. But I'd had enough. You know what? I said, grabbing the shopping cart. Screw aisle 12, screw the rules, and screw you. I pushed the cart toward the frozen food section, toward the darkness where the lights had gone out. If something was waiting for me there, at least I'd meet it on my own terms. Henley followed, his footsteps echoing in the sudden quiet. This is inadvisable, Jake. The system doesn't respond well to direct confrontation. Good. I'm tired of responding well to the system. The frozen food aisles were significantly colder than the rest of the store. Ice had formed on the floor, making each step treacherous. The freezer cases hummed louder than usual, their compressors working overtime to maintain temperature in the frigid air. And standing at the end of aisle 4 was the group from the security monitor: Tommy, Billy, and 3 others I didn't recognize. They stood in a perfect line, blocking the aisle, their Save Mart uniforms spotless despite the icy conditions. Their eyes reflected the dim emergency lighting, like animal eyes caught in headlights. "Jake," Tommy said, but his voice had lost all the warmth and familiarity I remembered. "You're late for processing. Processing can wait." I pushed my cart toward them, not sure what I intended to do, but certain I wasn't going to follow any more rules. The cart's wheels cracked through the thin layer of ice, leaving dark tracks in my wake. "You cannot leave the designated path," Billy said. "Deviation from protocol results in immediate termination of employment status." "Then terminate me." That's when I saw it, a crack in Billy's expression. For just a moment, something human flickered behind his eyes, a brief recognition, like he was remembering what it felt like to make his own choices. The other figures noticed too. They turned toward Billy with synchronized movements, their faces showing the first emotions I'd seen from them: concern. "Processing parameters are non-negotiable," one of the strangers said. But Billy took a step backward, away from the line. I remember the parking lot. I remember choosing. The temperature dropped even further. Ice crystals began forming in the air, falling like snow inside the store. The freezer cases started making grinding noises, their compressors struggling against the supernatural cold. "Billy," Tommy said, "returned to formation." "No!" Billy's voice was stronger now, more like the person he'd been in the parking lot. "Jake's right. We don't have to follow their rules anymore." The spell broke. Billy lunged forward and grabbed my cart, helping me push it toward the back exit. "This way." The loading dock. Behind us, the other figures let out sounds that weren't quite human, frustrated mechanical whines that echoed through the store. Hemi's voice rose above them. Containment breach in frozen foods, initiating emergency protocols. Every light in the store went out. Complete darkness swallowed the store. Not the dim glow of emergency lighting or the faint illumination from exit signs. Absolute blackness that seemed to absorb sound as well as sight. I could hear Billy breathing beside me, quick and panicked, but I couldn't see him even though he was close enough to touch. "Keep moving," he whispered. "The loading dock is straight back, past the dairy cooler." We pushed the cart forward, its wheels squealing against the icy floor. Each step felt treacherous. I couldn't tell if I was about to walk into a display rack or fall into some supernatural pit that had opened up in the familiar aisles. Behind us, something was moving. Not footsteps exactly, but a sliding sound like wet fabric being dragged across linoleum. The other figures, Tommy and the strangers, were following, but they didn't seem constrained by the darkness the way we were. "Billy," I said quietly, "how do you know where we're going?" Part of me never left this place. I can feel the layout even in the dark. His voice was strained, like he was fighting against something. "But Jake, there's something you need to understand about the loading dock." A new sound joined the sliding behind us, mechanical clicking, like dozens of keyboards typing in unison. The sound was coming from everywhere at once, as if the store itself had become some massive computer processing our attempted escape. What about the loading dock? It's not really an exit. None of the exits are real anymore, not after 3 a.m. The store, it changes, becomes something else. My cart hit something solid, a wall where there shouldn't be one. I ran my hands along the surface and felt smooth metal, like the side of a refrigerated truck trailer. "This wasn't here before," I said. The layout shifts during emergency protocols. They're trying to funnel us somewhere specific. The clicking sounds grew louder, more frantic. In the rhythm, I could almost make out a pattern. Short bursts, followed by longer sequences, like Morse code. But the message, if there was one, was beyond my understanding. A light appeared ahead of us, not electric lighting, but a cold blue glow that seemed to emanate from the air itself. It illuminated a narrow corridor that definitely hadn't existed in the store's original floor plan. The walls were the same institutional white as Save Mart's interior, but they curved at impossible angles, creating the sense that we were walking through the inside of some enormous tube. "Where does this lead?" I asked. "Processing center," Billy said grimly. "They're hurting us there." "Then we don't go that way." I turned the cart around, but the darkness behind us had changed too. Where the main store should have been, I could see only a void filled with those sliding sounds and mechanical clicking. "There's nowhere else to go," Billy said. "The system has us contained." That's when I remembered something Tommy had told me during my first week. Not one of the 7 rules, just casual conversation about the building's history. The Save Mart had been built on Riverside Cemetery, but before that, it had been farmland. The Kowalski family farm, actually, which was why Tommy knew so much about the area. "Billy, you said part of you never left this place." "What did you mean?" "When you work nights long enough, when you follow the rules perfectly, you start to merge with the store, become part of its operating system. That's what they want from all of us." The blue glow was getting brighter, and I could see that the corridor opened into a circular room ahead. The mechanical clicking was louder now, almost deafening, and I realized it wasn't random. It was the sound of the store's cash registers, dozens of them operating simultaneously, even though there were no customers. "But you broke free," I said. "In the parking lot, you warned me. Only partially. The part of me that escaped was just an echo, a shadow of who I used to be. The real me is still in there." He pointed toward the glowing room, waiting to be fully integrated. We reached the entrance to the circular space, and what I saw made my stomach turn. The room was filled with checkout lanes. Not the 4 lanes from the main store, but dozens of them arranged in concentric circles. At each register stood a figure in a Save Mart uniform, mechanically scanning invisible items and bagging phantom purchases. I recognized some of them. Tommy was at Register 7, his movements robotic and precise. A woman I didn't know worked Register 12, her face blank with concentration. At the center of it all, behind a customer service desk that pulsed with the same blue glow, sat Henley. "Welcome to the processing center," he called out, his voice echoing off the curved walls. "You're just in time for the midnight inventory." Midnight inventory? When we count our human resources and determine their optimal utilization. You've shown remarkable resistance to standard protocols, Jake. That makes you valuable. The figures at the registers all turned toward us simultaneously, their scanner guns pointed in our direction like weapons. The red laser dots created a constellation of targeting points across my chest and face. Valuable for what? Management training. We need someone who understands both compliance and rebellion. Someone who can help us refine the system. Billy grabbed my arm. "Don't listen to him. That's how they got me the first time. Offered me a promotion, said I'd shown leadership potential." "The offer stands," Henley continued. "Join us voluntarily and you'll retain more of your original personality. Resist and you'll become like the others. Functional, but limited." I looked at the figures working their registers, saw the vacant expressions, the mechanical movements. Whatever they had once been, there was nothing human left in their faces. "There's a third option," I said. "Which is?" Instead of answering, I grabbed one of the shopping carts from our makeshift barricade and hurled it as hard as I could at the nearest register. The cart crashed into the scanner, sending sparks flying. The figure operating it let out a sound like a computer error tone. Sharp, electronic, definitely not human. "Destroy the registers." Billy understood immediately. He grabbed another cart and smashed it into Register 12. More sparks, more error tones. The blue glow flickered like a power surge was running through the room. The other figures turned toward us, abandoning their posts. But instead of walking, they moved in that same sliding motion I'd heard in the darkness. Their feet never quite touching the ground, gliding across the floor like they were on invisible conveyor belts. "Containment breach," Henley announced, his composure finally cracking. "All units converge on Sector 7. I grabbed a price check scanner from one of the damaged registers and started smashing it into the others. Each destroyed scanner caused the blue glow to dim a little more. Billy was doing the same on the other side of the room, working his way toward the center where Henley sat. "You don't understand," Henley shouted over the cacophony of breaking equipment and error tones. "Without the system, there's nothing. No structure, no purpose, no meaning." "Maybe that's better than being a robot," I shouted back, destroying another register. The sliding figures were almost on us now, but their movements were becoming erratic as more scanners went offline. Some of them flickered in and out of existence like bad television reception. Others moved in slow motion, their programming corrupted by the damage we were causing. Tommy reached me first, his hand stretched out like he was trying to grab something. But when he touched my shoulder, his fingers passed right through me. He was becoming transparent, insubstantial. "Jake," he said, and for a moment his voice sounded almost normal. "Thank you." Then he faded away completely. The same thing was happening to the other figures. As their registers were destroyed, they lost cohesion, becoming ghostly outlines before vanishing entirely. "They're free," Billy said, understanding what was happening. "Destroying the scanners is breaking their connection to the system." Only Henley remained, still sitting behind his customer service desk. The blue glow around him was intensifying, as if he was absorbing the power from the destroyed registers. "You think you've won," he said, "but you've only delayed the inevitable. The system will rebuild, find new locations, new employees. This is just one store, Jake. One small part of something much larger. I raised the scanner I've been using as a weapon. Then we'd better make sure it can't spread from here." I brought the scanner down on Henley's desk. The scanner shattered against Henley's desk, sending blue sparks cascading across the circular room. Henley screamed, not a human sound, but the high-pitched whine of electronics overloading. The blue glow around him intensified, then began flickering erratically. His perfectly pressed suit started to fray at the edges, as if the fabric was being pulled apart by invisible hands. "You don't know what you've done," he said, his voice distorting like a radio losing signal. "The system maintains order. Without order, there is only chaos." The customer service desk began to crack down the middle, revealing circuitry and blinking lights instead of wood and metal. Henley's chair was sinking into the floor, or maybe the floor was rising around him. It was hard to tell in the strobing light. "Good," I said, grabbing another scanner. "I'll take chaos over slavery." I smashed the second scanner into the desk, and this time the entire room shuddered. The curved walls began to ripple like water, and I could hear the distant sound of the main store's structure groaning under some tremendous stress. Billy was backing toward what had been the entrance, but the corridor we'd come through was gone. In its place was a standard Save Mart aisle, cleaning supplies and pet food. Aisle 12. Jake, the room is collapsing back into the normal store. I looked around and saw he was right. The concentric circles of cash registers were fading, becoming transparent. Through them, I could see the familiar layout of Save Mart's interior. Fluorescent lights, linoleum floors, shelves of merchandise. But Hemley wasn't fading. If anything, he was becoming more solid, more real, as his artificial environment dissolved around him. His suit had stopped fraying, and his two perfect features were shifting into something harder, more predatory. The processing center was just one interface, he said, standing up from his sinking chair. I am the system. I am every rule you've ever followed without question, every order you've obeyed without thinking. He stepped toward me, and where his feet touched the ground, the floor turned black. Not shadow black, but void black, like he was creating holes in reality with each step. Every workplace has someone like me, Jake. The manager who never explains why, only demands compliance. The supervisor who creates arbitrary rules and punishes those who question them. I exist because people like you choose comfort over courage, security over freedom. I walked away, but there wasn't far to go. The room had almost completely transformed back into aisle 12, and I was trapped between the pet food shelves and something that had never been entirely human. But you didn't choose comfort, Hemley continued. You chose pain. You chose uncertainty. You chose to think for yourself. His face twisted into an expression of genuine disgust. That makes you dangerous. He lunged forward, his hands reaching for my throat. But instead of flesh and bone, his fingers were cables and wires, sparking with the same blue energy that had powered the processing center. I dodged to the right, knocking over a display of dog treats, and grabbed a can of industrial floor cleaner from the shelf. The label warned about caustic chemicals and ventilation requirements. Not exactly a weapon, but better than nothing. "Billy!" I shouted. "Help me corner him!" But when I looked around, Billy was gone. In his place stood the Billy I had seen on the security monitors, vacant expression, pristine Save Mart vest, dead eyes that reflected nothing. Processing complete, Monitor Billy said in that flat, electronic voice. Employee 47,731 will now be integrated into standard operations. My heart sank. The real Billy, the part that had escaped and warned me in the parking lot, must have been pulled back into the system when the room collapsed. I was alone with two versions of corporate control, the ENFCer Henley and the compliant drone Billy had become again. Integration requires surrender of individual will, Henley said, advancing on me with his cable fingers sparking. Resistance will be eliminated. I twisted the cap off the floor cleaner and threw the contents at both of them. The chemical hit Henley square in the chest, and he let out another electronic scream as his suit began to dissolve. Smoke poured from the holes, revealing more circuitry underneath. Monitor Billy just stood there as the cleaner splashed across his uniform, apparently immune to physical damage. "You can't destroy me with household chemicals," Hemley said, but his voice was weaker now, more distorted. "I am policy. I am procedure. I am the structure that keeps society functioning." "No," I said, backing toward the front of the store. "You're just another bully with a fancy title." The main store was reasserting itself now, the supernatural elements fading as the processing center's power failed. The fluorescent lights were coming back on, one section at a time. The familiar hum of refrigeration units replaced the mechanical clicking of phantom cash registers. but Himley was still following me, leaving a trail of black footprints and trailing cables. Monitor Billy walked beside him with robotic precision, their footsteps perfectly synchronized. I reached the customer service area and saw the real security monitors, the normal ones that showed actual camera feeds. On the screens, I could see the main store returning to its regular layout, but I also saw something else. Emergency vehicles in the parking lot. Fire trucks, police cars, an ambulance. Someone had called for help. That's when I noticed the time on the monitors. 6:47 a.m. Somehow, hours had passed while we were in the processing center. My shift was almost over. Rule number 7, Hamley said, reading my thoughts. Always finish your shift. 13 more minutes, Jake. 13 minutes until you're free to leave. Unless I choose to leave now. The system has invested significant resources in your training. Early departure would require compensation. I looked at the clock, then at the emergency vehicles outside, then at the entrance to Save Mart. 13 minutes felt like 13 hours with Henley's sparking form approaching and Monitor Billy's dead eyes staring at me. I made my choice. I ran, not toward the back exit or the loading dock, but straight for the front entrance. The automatic doors opened as I approached, letting in the first light of dawn and the sound of radio chatter from the emergency responders. Behind me, Henley let out a roar of rage that shattered every piece of glass in the store. Windows, refrigerator doors, light fixtures, everything. The sound was so loud it triggered car alarms in the parking lot. I burst through the doors and into the humid Ohio morning, gasping clean air that didn't taste like ozone and fear. The paramedics were already moving toward me, probably called by someone who'd heard the breaking glass. "Sir, are you injured?" one of them asked, noticing the burns on my hands and the blood on my shirt. I turned back to look at Save Mart. Through the shattered windows, I could see Himley standing in the doorway, but he couldn't cross the threshold, couldn't leave the store that had been his domain. As the sunlight hit him, he began to fade like a photograph left too long in the sun. Monitor Billy was nowhere to be seen. "Yeah," I told the paramedic, "but I think I'm going to be okay." The store stood empty behind us, its automatic doors opening and closing aimlessly, as if it was trying to breathe. The doctors at Marietta Memorial treated my burns and asked a lot of questions I couldn't answer honestly. "Gas leak explosion," I told them, which seemed to satisfy everyone involved. The fire marshal found plenty of evidence to support that story. Shattered glass, electrical damage, the smell of industrial chemicals that had soaked into the store's ventilation system. Nobody wanted to dig deeper into what had really happened at Save Mart. They offered me workers' compensation. Carla even called to apologize for the equipment malfunction that had injured me, though she sounded like she was reading from a script. Corporate wanted to make sure I wouldn't sue, apparently. I signed their papers and took their money, not because I needed it, but because I wanted to see how far the cover-up would go. Pretty far, as it turned out. The Save Mart closed for extensive renovations that same week. They brought in crews to gut the interior, replace all the electrical systems, install new flooring. When it reopened 2 weeks later, the layout had changed completely. Aisle 12 was now aisle 9, and it sold greeting cards instead of pet food. Tommy Kowalski never came back to work. According to the staff directory, he'd transferred to the distribution center in Lancaster. But when I drove over there to look for him, nobody had heard of anyone by that name. It was like he'd never existed. The same went for Billy Patterson and the other night shift workers whose faces I'd seen in that processing center. Either transferred to distant locations or simply erased from company records. Save Mart was very thorough about cleaning up its messes. I found a new job pretty quickly. daylight construction work with a crew renovating the old armory downtown. The pay was decent, and more importantly, I could see the sun while I worked. After 4 nights of artificial lighting and supernatural encounters, I developed a deep appreciation for natural illumination. But I kept thinking about what Hemley had said. This is just one store, Jake. One small part of something much larger. I started paying attention to things I'd previously ignored. The way some retail employees moved with mechanical precision. The dead look in certain managers' eyes. The stories people told about overnight shifts at various businesses around Ohio. Stories that sounded disturbingly familiar. Last week, I drove past the Save Mart. It looked normal from the outside, busy with afternoon shoppers and senior citizens using the motorized carts. But I noticed something. They weren't hiring for night shift positions anymore. A sign in the window advertised extended daytime hours instead. Maybe they'd learned their lesson. Maybe they'd decided the system was too risky to maintain. Or maybe they'd just found better ways to hide it. I've been keeping a list of unusual workplace stories I hear around town. The gas station attendant who works alone, but claims he sometimes hears voices from the storage room. The librarian who swears the automatic book return system operates by itself after hours. The security guard at the community college who says certain buildings feel different at night, like they're thinking. It's possible I'm seeing patterns where none exist, finding conspiracy in coincidence. That's what happens when you've experienced something that breaks your understanding of reality. Everything afterward feels suspect. But I don't think I'm wrong. I think Save Mart was just the beginning, and I think there are more Hemleys out there, more systems designed to turn people into compliant automatons. The only difference now is that I know what to look for. And I know that sometimes, the most important thing you can do is refuse to follow the rules. Even when it hurts, especially when it hurts.